So let's look at applied cryptography, and we'll cover some of the fundamental areas. We'll then look at some symmetric key encryption, hashing methods, message authentication codes, key derivation functions, public key methods, key exchange, signatures, and digital certificates. But before we start, let's quickly look over the history or certainly some of the foundation methods that we'll investigate as part of this presentation. So we've been using ciphers for thousands of years, but it was really in the early 1970s that we saw the work at IBM creating the Lucifer cipher and especially the DES or data encryption standard method. Then in 1976 there was a revolution through a paper published by Whitfield Diffie and Marty Hellman, and that outlined the Diffie-Hellman key exchange method. Then in the year after, in 1977, Rivest, Shamir and Edelman came up with the RSA public key encryption method. In 1992, Ralph Merkle came up with the Merkle tree. The Merkle tree is used in blockchain applications these days. And then in 1984, Odi Shamir came up with the principle of Shamir secret shares. And then around 1987, Niall Koblitz and Victor Miller came up with the concept of elliptic curve cryptography. So we'll be covering some of these areas within this presentation, such as the Diffie-Hellman method, the RSA method, elliptic curve cryptography. So in the Rivest, Shamir and Edelman paper, the RSA paper, they defined the concept of A and B and entity A speaking to entity B. And for this, they actually defined the concept of A as Alice and B as Bob. Then Bruce Nair came along and thought up several other names, such as Eve, a passive adversary, Malloy, an active adversary, Victor, a verifier, and Peggy, a prover. And we also have the concept of Trent, where Trent is trusted by both Bob and Alice. Throughout this presentation, we'll outline Bob and Alice, Trent, and a little bit of Eve. So first, let's look at some basic fundamental principles that we need to understand in cryptography. Overall, what we have is that we have some way of creating plain text. That's our normal characters that we have. And then we convert this into ciphertext. So there's some way that we can either encode or we encrypt to create our ciphertext, and then we can decode on the other end. Unfortunately, Eve may be listening to the communications channel, so we need to find a way to make sure that the ciphertext cannot be broken. So for this, we use the concept of keys. The two methods that we'll be looking at are symmetric key encryption, or secret key, that's just one key that Bob and Alice use, or asymmetric encryption, or public key. With this, we have two keys which work together, a public key and a private key. If we use one of the keys, then we need the other key to do the reverse. But with the secret key method, if we operate on something with the secret key, then it's the secret key that will reverse that operation back again. So, at the most basic level, we need some way to convert the characters, the plain text that we have, into the ciphertext. And ciphertext will be a whole bunch of ones and zeros. Typically, it's in the form of bytes, 8 bits, and we operate on these bytes with our encryption methods. So we convert our plain text into ones and zeros, and then we can encrypt into our ciphertext. The two main formats that we use to be able to encode or interpret these ciphertext values is hexadecimal and base 64. With hexadecimal, we take 4 bits at a time, and then we convert that into a hexadecimal value. So in this case, we have 8s, 4s, 2s, and 1s. So we have 0, 0, 1, 0. So we have a 4. For this one, we have a 1. So we have a 5 represented here. Okay, and 2 hex characters represent 1 byte. So as I said, we normally operate on byte values. So we have 2 hex characters for every byte that we have. The other format that we use is what's called base64, and with this we take our cipher stream, our bits in our cipher stream, and we take 6 bits at a time. From there, we then represent the binary value as a base64 character. So in this case, we have a Z, and then there's the next one, and so on. And then at the end, we pad with zeros to give us this character here, and then we need a multiple of 4 of these base64 characters, so we pad with an equal sign at the end. And you can often spot base64 because it has these little equal signs at the end. One of the simplest operations that we have is what's called an exclusive OR operation. With this, it's like a simple adder circuit. We take a 0 and a 0 gives us 0, a 0 and a 1 gives us 1, 1 and a 0 gives us 1, a 1 and a 1 gives us 0. And the great thing about the XOR operation, exclusive OR, is that we can reverse it easily. In fact, we can encrypt a cipher stream by XORing all the bits together from the plain text with a key and producing our ciphertext. And then if we take the ciphertext and XOR with the same key again that, say, Alice would have, then we'll get our plain text back again. So the great thing with this is that we don't lose any of the information within inside the data. And overall, this operation is easily reversible and it's fast. So one way we could do this is that Alice would have a secret key. She would then use what's called a key generator to be able to generate a key stream as long as the plain text, and then XOR the plain text with the key stream, and we can get our ciphertext and then easily reverse it. So first, let's look at symmetric key methods. So if you're interested, the links are here for some of the examples that we're going to show. With symmetric key, what we have is one key, and that key is used on either side. We can encrypt with the secret key. That creates the ciphertext, and then we decrypt with the same key. Some standard methods that we use are AES, DES, 3DES, Blowfish, and so on. But normally these days we use AES encryption for our symmetric key methods. We can also use what's called a stream cipher, and I'll explain that in a little minute. But that's a lightweight method. So let's have a look at symmetric key encryption. So with symmetric key encryption, what we have is a single key that will encrypt the data into ciphertext, and then the same key will be able to decrypt it. Hopefully, Eve will not be able to find the required secret key within the time that matters for Bob and Alice for the message to be kept secure. Overall, the most popular method that we have for symmetric key encryption is called the Advanced Encryption Standard, or AES. It was developed by NIST, or it was standardized by NIST in 2001, and is still the most popular symmetric key method. We can also get other ones such as DES, 3DES, Blowfish, and many others. When it comes to stream ciphers, and I'll explain stream ciphers in a little minute, the most popular method for that is the CHA-20 method, along with what's called AES GCM. AES was created from the Raindale method and was invented by these two researchers here. CHA-20 was created by Daniel J. Bernstein. With a block cipher, and initially what we do is we take the plain text and we split it up into what are called message blocks. For AES, this is 128 bits or 16 bytes in them. We take each of these blocks and then we encrypt them with a secret key and possibly with a salt value. This will create our ciphertext values, our ciphertext blocks, and then we'll put all the blocks together to create our ciphertext. At the very end, we will be missing a few bytes, possibly, so we need to create what's called a pad, and we'll pad the last block with certain characters. So with a stream cipher, what we have is different, is that we have a secret key, some salt value, and then that will create an infinitely long key stream. But it just has to be as long as the plain text stream. We then take one bit at a time and we XOR them together to give us our cipher stream. This is a much faster method typically than the block cipher. Along with this, with symmetric key, we have various modes that we can actually apply. For this, we can apply a different mode. These are the different modes that we have here. CTR, CFB, ECB, and so on. So what we have is that when we encrypt our data, we apply a certain mode of the symmetric key onto it. We need a key for this, and for this we either generate a randomly generated key, or we might use a secret password or a passphrase and use what's called a key derivation function to be able to create the symmetric key for us. We can then use that symmetric key to encrypt the data, and Alice can do the same. If it's a randomly generated key, she'll have to use the same key as Bob has, but if it's a shared password, then she'll be able to create the same symmetric key as Bob because she uses the same password. Okay, so these are some of the modes that we actually have here. The simplest mode is what's called the electronic codebook. With this, we basically take the message blocks and we encrypt with the key. There is no salt value used with this at all, and we create our cipher blocks. A more advanced method is what's called cipher block chaining, where we take the key and we add some salt or an initialization vector into the start of the ciphering, and then we take the output from each block and feed it into the next one, and so on. This allows us to be able to change the output for the same input using the salt value. Another thing that we can add is what's called authenticated encryption with additional data. With this, we add in some extra information into the encryption process, along with the salt, to be able to create the cipher stream. On the other end, Alice will be able to take the same data and then add that into the decryption process and create, hopefully, the plaintext that Bob had initially. This additional data might relate to something like a session ID, network port, and so on. And this will stop the problem of Eve playing back the cipher to Alice. As a second concept, let's look at hashing methods. So for each of these topics, there will be examples here that you can try out yourself, but this presentation is mainly the theory around these concepts. With a hashing method, what we have is that we can take our plaintext, our data, and then create a fixed length hash value. For MD5, this is 168 bits long and can be represented either as a hexadecimal value or as a base 64 value. Then we can have what's called SHA-1, and SHA-1 is 160 bits, so we have a longer hash value here, and again it takes the data and will create this fixed length hash. Every time that we perform the hash, we get a deterministic output, which means that it will always be the same for the same input. We can also add what's called salt into the process, and this will allow us to be able to change the output hash depending on the input and also the salt value that we use. So in this case, the MD5 hash for the word hello with a capital H is this hash. But then if we add in a salt value at the start of the data, then we will produce a new hash for it. We can do this in OpenSSL, where we can add a salt value with our input data and then produce a salted hashed value for this. The format that we have here is the one identifies the method, ABC identifies the salt, and this part here identifies the hashed password with the salt. So typical cryptographic hashes are MD5, SHA-1, SHA-256, SHA-3, RIPE MD, and Blake 2B. So with hashing, if we change one small part of the input data, it should completely change the hash. So it's not possible for us to reverse back from the hash to the original data. If we're using OpenSSL, that's the standard software that we would typically use with cryptography, then we can use these commands in here to be able to create the hash values that we require. Okay, so the salt value is added into the hashing process, and what we have is the method. We then have the salt that's been added, and then that gives us our hash value that we get in the end. When the user logs in with their password, we add the salt value to it. We then apply a certain hashing method, and then that should create the hash value that we have here. The main methods that we have for hashing are these. MD5 isn't a strong hashing method because we can get what's called a collision, and I'll explain collisions in a little minute. SHA-1 is much better, but there is the possibility with a lot of computing power for a collision to be possible. So the hashing methods we should use are these ones here, SHA-256 and SHA-512. Often these are known as SHA-2, but there are other ones such as SHA-3 and Blake 2B are strong hash values. The 256 identifies the number of bits in the hash, as was 512. But we can also get variable length hashes, that are not fixed in their length. These include shake 128, shake 512, and so on. And they're defined as an extendable output function. So some of the methods that are integrated into OpenSSL for hashing include these ones here. We can see it still supports SHA-1, but there's SHA-256 there. And there are other ones such as SM3, which is actually a Chinese standard for hashing. But you see the SHA-3 hashing methods are well supported there, along with the Blake 2B methods. Okay, so with the XOF, we take a salt value and we define the length of the output that we want for our hash, and it produces a hash value which is as long as we require. Unfortunately, what we get though is the possibility of a hash collision. With this, it's the point at which we have two different data values, and when we hash them, we get a collision. This means that the output hash is the same. So a collision is caused by two data elements having the same hash. A similar context is where two data elements have a partial context, known as a pre-image attack, and a full context is when we have, say, two images and they produce the same hash value. That's a full context attack. And it's possible that some methods have some flaws. This is one flaw in MD5, where if we flip a few bits, then it's possible to create the same hash value as an output. But something that's worrying is that we can take, say, two images, and with MD5, we can easily create a collision. So in this case, in 2014, Nat McHugh created a hash collision with two images of Barry White and James Brown, and then stuffed bytes into the images and produced the same hash value as an output. It only cost 60 cents, and it ran with Hashcat on the CUDA core. And it's basically related to what's called the birthday attack. With the birthday attack, only needs 70 people in a room, and you'll find that there's a 99% chance that two people will share the same birthday. And Nat even did it with three images later on. And then we get the different speeds when it comes to the hashing methods. So these here are the fast methods, SHA-1, MD5 and so on. And then we get slow ones and then ultra slow ones. As we'll find, these ones, the slow ones, are usually used for key derivation functions because we want to slow down the process of cracking a hash password. And overall, there are many different formats that you'll find for hashed values. So for cracking them, then GPU is an excellent device for running processes in parallel. And these two crackers here can parallel process our hash cracking to speed the process up. Okay, so the basic methods that we use to be able to crack them are either rainbow tables, dictionary attacks, or brute force. With a rainbow table, we build up a massive table, a hash table of these hashes, and then we should be able to reverse these back to the original value. These are used when there is no salt value used. So with a salt value, you couldn't really use a rainbow table well. The other method that we have is from a dictionary attack. And with this, we could take a dictionary of common words and then create the hash values that related to those. Then again, we could actually just match that to the hash value that we have. The final one is one that is very computationally expensive, but if the other methods don't work, then we would use brute force. In this, we would be able to iterate through all of the characters that we have, and match them to a hash value, and then check to see if it's the same hash value that we have for our hash password. Okay, so how do we compute the time it would take to crack a password? Well, for this we can estimate. Okay, so let's bring up Python here. So we have a 7-digit password with lowercase. So the number of passwords will be equal to 2 to the power of 26 to the power of 7. So that's the total number of passwords that we have. So the time to crack will be the number of passwords divided by the number of cracking attempts per second. So in this case is 100 billion, and we can print out the time, which will be 0.08 of a second. If we want the average time, we can divide by 2 there to give us 0.04. If we now try for upper and lower case, then we'll have 52 characters here, and we can work out the time to crack for 100 billion attempts per second, and that will give us 5.13. Okay, so in this way we can actually estimate how long it's going to take us in total, and how long on average it would take us to crack with brute force our hashed password. The next concept we're going to look at is MACs, or message authentication codes. And they're extremely important when it comes to the integrity of messages. For this, we will take our data and then we create our hash, but now we add in the symmetric key into it to produce what's called a MAC, or in this case an HMAC. This is a code here that we would have, and we would send that along with the message. Then Alice will take the message, create her own HMAC with this shared key, and then compare the MACs together. In this way we can check both the message and also that it was Bob that actually sent it. So Bob is basically signing a message with the secret key that Alice also has. If Eve comes along, she wouldn't have the secret key, so she wouldn't be able to sign the message. Where the MAC is used for fairly extensively is when we have a stream cipher. So in this case we have the AES CTR method, and we need to add a MAC onto this cipher, because it's possible to flip the bits in the cipher stream and change the message. So in this case we should be able to see that we can actually flip the characters of the message and produce a different message output. Okay, so what we're going to do is flip 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Let's flip the 9th character, and we can see here I've changed the character 1 to 2 because I flipped the least significant bit within the 9th character there. So that shows that we need a MAC code to go along with our cipher stream, so that Alice can actually check the integrity of the cipher that she receives. Okay, so here's just an example here. Again, we can also use a cipher rather than a hash. In this case, we're using AES or 3DES, but this is less common than the hashing methods that we used for MACs. In Chacha 20, we get what's called Poly 1305, and poly 1305 is the MAC that goes along with Cha-Cha-20. So in this case, we're creating our MAC, typically defined as what's called a tag, and the tag will go along with the cipher stream so that Alice can actually check it against the message that she receives by creating the same poly 1305 tag. Okay, so this page here outlines some of the MACs that we can actually use that are built into OpenSSL. So just to show you the range of MAC methods that we can have, here are some of them here. As a further concept with hashing methods, we have what are called key derivation functions, or KDFs. With a key derivation function, we take a password or a passphrase and then we create a key based on that. The number of keys that we create will obviously now be dictated by the number of passwords that we use. And for this, we can compute what's called a key entropy. And a key entropy will actually now allow us to estimate what the encryption key size is for the number of passwords that we have. So if we try a few different examples, we can see here for a 10 character password with upper and lowercase letters and with numeric values, then it would take us this amount of time maximum to be able to crack it, and this is the number of equivalent bits that would cover all of those passwords. Okay, so we can either have lowercase, we can have upper and lowercase, upper lowercase and numeric, upper lowercase, numeric, and additional characters. And we can see there that the number of characters increases as we increase the number of characters that we can use, and that will increase the total number of passwords that are possible. So with a key derivation function, we take a secret value such as a password and a salt, and then we put it into this HMAC key derivation function to create the key, which is then used for our encryption. On the other side, Alice will use the same secret, the same salt value, and she will create the same key for the decryption process. In TLS, that's the normal network connection that we typically use. We have a key exchange, which will create a secret on either side. We then feed that secret into our HKeyDF, and then that will create the key for us to be able to encrypt and decrypt. One of the core things about a key derivation function is that we want to be able to reduce the amount of we want to reduce the opportunities for someone to crack the password. So for that, we slow down the whole of the hashing process. A typical way to do this is to have a number of rounds for the hash that we go round and keep going round. The advantage with this is that if we have a multi-core system, then it's not possible to parallelize that type of processing. So we end up only using one of the cores to be able to perform this hashing process. One of the most popular methods for a key derivation function is what's called PBKDF2, and that's password-based key derivation function 2. For this, we generate our key based on a passphrase and a salt value, and then we define the number of rounds that we have, the hashing method that we want to be using, and then the key length. And that will create a certain key that we can use for our encryption. On the other side, Alice uses the same parameters to be able to create the same key. Another popular one is script, and that's often used in Linux systems, and has quite a simple parameter that we set that will define the number of rounds that we have for our hashing method. Argon 2 is a more up-to-date method. It tries to defeat GPUs for memory, the parallel processing and so on. It has the number of iterations as we had before, but it also has other parameters such as a memory cost, some salt, and the parallelization factor for the process. Those parameters are then stored in a password database along with the hashed password. If you're interested, this is the table of the parameters and roughly how long it takes. So if we want the password to take 1.39 seconds or so for a certain type of hardware, then we would set up these parameters to be these. But we can see as we increase the value of some of these parameters, you can see that the time it takes to hash each password takes a longer time. Okay, so this is some of the OWASP recommendations for using these key derivation functions. If you need FIPS 140 compliance, then we must use the PBK DFS2 method. But for other ones, it's possible to use the other techniques. Along with this, we can add what's called a pepper key. So with this, we might create our hashing method, and then we add in an additional pepper key onto the hash value that relates to a certain domain or a certain common purpose. For example, we could have a number of pepper keys, sales, production, and from there, and then all of our passwords, say in the sales department, would have an additional pepper key added to the hashing process that related to sales, and we would have to use that value for all of our passwords in that domain. And then in production, we would use another domain key for that one. Okay, so this allows us to be able to create a pepper key. And sometimes what we do is we store the pepper key away in a secure domain so that no one can actually see what the pepper keys actually are. Now let's look at public key encryption. And the two main methods that we'll look at are RSA and elliptic curve cryptography, or ECC. So with public key methods, we have two main elements to this, the encryption part and the signing part. With encryption, then if Bob wants to send some encrypted data to Alice, she sends over her public key. Then Bob will encrypt that with her public key. She will get a cipher, and then she will use her private key to be able to decrypt it. So this is what is defined as a key pair, and both Bob and Alice can have a key pair. But for Bob to send to Alice, then we use Alice's public key, and then we use Alice's private key to be able to decrypt. Bob can add integrity into this by proving that he is the person sending the data. For this, he signs a hash of the data with his private key, and then sends it over, the signature over to Alice, and then she verifies that with Bob's public key. So those are the two main methods that we have with our public key methods. Okay, so here it is here. So there's the public key of Alice, encrypting. Bob will use that, and then the private key is then used to decrypt. And one of the main methods we use for this was created by Revest, Shamir and Edelman in 1977. And it was defined in this classic paper here, from MIT, the basic methods of creating a signature and encryption method with RSA. So along with the RSA, we also have elliptic curve cryptography and LGAMO methods. So the two main methods that we'll outline here are the two most popular methods, RSA and elliptic curve, and we won't really cover LGAMO here. Okay, so let's look at RSA. With RSA, we take two prime numbers, P and Q, and we create what's called a modulus, which is the multiplication of P and Q. That's the value of n. We then work out a value of phi here. We pick a value of E that doesn't share a value with phi. Then we work out D, the decryption exponent, which is the inverse of E mod phi. For the cipher, we take the message to the power of E mod n, and then we take that cipher to the power of D mod n, and we can work out the plain text again. So let's try that out with a simple example. So let's take a prime number of 97 and another one of 101. We can work out n, which is P times Q, and work out phi, which is P minus 1 times Q minus 1. Okay, we'll just print out those values. There we go. Okay, so we can pick a value of E that doesn't share a factor with phi. So it looks like 2, 4, 5 are not possible. So let's pick a value of 7. The D value, the decryption exponent, becomes E to the minus 1 mod phi. And we'll compute that as that value there. Okay, so if we have a message of 43, then the cipher becomes m to the power of E mod n. So that is this value. And then the plain text will be C to the power of D mod m. So hopefully we'll end up back with the message value, which is 43. Okay, so that's the simple operation of RSA there. Okay, so there's the basic methods that we use here. So we take our public key, the E and the N. This is the public exponent and the modulus value, and apply that to the message. Then to decrypt, we take the decryption exponent, D, and the modulus, and then recover the message. Okay, in RSA, one of the most popular methods for doing this encryption is called OAEP, or optimal asymmetric encryption padding. When it comes to signatures, we can use a range of signatures. We could use what's called PPSS or PKCS1 version 1.5 is used for signing with RSA. The other method that we use for public key encryption is called elliptic curve. With this, we have an equation such as this for an elliptic curve. And this gives us a nice analog curve that looks a bit like that. But in real life, what we end up with is that we add in a mod operation into this, and we end up with points that represent our curve. And the basic operation is that we add 2 points together, and then we get another point that relates to the curve. The main curves that we have overall are curve 25519, sept 256K1, which is the Bitcoin curve, and the NIST-defined curve of P256. We can use a bigger curve if we need, but these ones are pretty good for today's standards, and they produce these digital signatures and these key exchange methods. Basically what happens is that we have a base point on the curve G, and then we take a private key, SK in this case, and we work at another point on the curve called SKG. This becomes our public key point. So we shouldn't be able to reverse back the value of SK even though we have this public key value here. And overall, we use very simple operations like a point addition and a point double to be able to very quickly compute this value here. So this is the public key, and this becomes the private key. This is a scalar value, typically 256 bits, where this is an XY point, so it's typically 512 bits. So here's an example of a key. So we can see there's the private key, 256 bits, and there's the public key. Often you will see a 04 at the start, and that identifies that this is an XY point overall. The curve we're using in this case is the Bitcoin or curve also used with Ethereum. Okay, so if we wanted to look at the parameters which we have, this is the prime number that we're using. This is the value of A and B. This is the G value here. And then the order is called N, and that's the number of points that are possible, because not every point is possible within an elliptic curve field. So this is the maximum number of points that we could get, but this is the number that we actually get here. Okay, so when we look at our curve that we get, then this is what we have, mod P. So there's the value of P there, there's the value of A, there's the value of B, and so on. Okay. We can also get what's called a compressed point, and if it doesn't start with the public key doesn't start with a 04, if it starts with a 02 or a 03, then this means that we're dealing with just the X value of the point. There's one there, and there's another one, and you can see this gives us a shorter key, or shorter public key, because it doesn't need the X and the Y value together. Basically, one is an even point and the other one is an odd point. There are various key formats that we can actually have. So this is one format called DER format. This is quite common. It's a binary format for our keys, and it typically starts with a value of 30. When we interpret it, we will get our basic parameters from them. This is a PEM format. In a PEM format, we have a base64 format, and that will define our keys between these two header and footer values. So this is an example of DER. We can see the 30 there, and then what it does is it gets interpreted typically using what's called object IDs. These object IDs actually identify the type of cryptography that we're actually using. So here are some of the OIDs that we use. They'll define things like RSA methods, different elliptic curves, hashing methods, and so on. And these OIDs should be a standard that can be interpreted by any system. And finally, if we want to store public keys of the people that we're communicating with, then we can create a keyring with all the public keys of the entities that we're communicating with, and we can also put our own private key on there when we want to sign for things. Okay, so as the next concept, let's look at key exchange methods. So the methods that you find should be available at this page here. So the problem that we have with a symmetric key is, how do we get the key from Bob to Alice without Eve actually discovering what the key is that they are using? So this was solved by Whitfield Diffie and Marty Hellman with the Diffie-Hellman method, and it was created in 1976. With this, it uses the logarithm method. With logarithms, if you remember from school, when we take that and that, we get this. And when we take g to the power of a to the power of b, we get g to the power of ab. So with the Diffie-Hellman method, Bob generates b, Alice a, and they send them over. Bob will compute g to the power of b mod p, and Alice will generate g to the power of a mod p. They send them over, and then he takes the value he receives from Alice and raises it to his secret, and they'll get this value, and Alice will do the same with Bob's value, raise it to the power of her a, and they'll both end up with the same shared key due to this method here. Okay, so here's an example here. We've got a value of 7 and 9. If they do the computation, then hopefully they end up with the same values in the end. Okay, so if we want to quickly try that out. Okay, so let's say that we'll agree on a value of 5 for g and a prime number of 97. Then Alice generates, say, 4. Bob generates a value of 7. Then the value that Alice will pass to Bob will be g to the power of a mod p, and the value that Bob will send is g to the power of b mod p. So those values are this and this. So the key that Alice will generate will be Bob's value to the power of her secret mod p, and the key that Bob will generate will be the value he gets from Alice to the power of his secret b mod p. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we should get the same value for Bob and Alice here, and that's right, they're both correct. Okay, so with the Diffie-Hellman method, we can openly exchange values and end up with the same shared secret. So what values are possible? Well, not all values are possible. If we pick a value of g and p, then some of them don't actually work. So if we do a simple example with a prime number of p, 11 here, and compute different values of g with different values of x with g, then we can see here that each value here relates to a unique output value. There's no repeated ones. So a g of 2 and a p of 11 is possible. But when we look at this one, we can actually see that we get repeats. So this one is not actually possible. So it just takes a simple Python program or a simple program to be able to calculate that the g and the p value can work together. Unfortunately, the problem we have here is that we can have Eve in the middle. For this, Eve can communicate with Bob and also with Alice and create two keys which are then used to encrypt and decrypt. So she will be able to decrypt the values from Bob and read them and then re-encrypt them to Alice. For the parameters that we have, then we only need two parameters, the prime number and the generator value. And luckily, OpenSSL can actually create these parameters for us. There's various sizes of groups that we have with Diffie-Hellman for the discrete logs, and we typically start with group 5 and above. We don't actually use discrete logs anymore for this Diffie-Hellman method. We use elliptic curve methods. So if you remember from before, we took a base point g and then we multiply it by a secret scalar a. And so in this case, it's a scalar value that's created by Bob and Alice, and they create an elliptic curve point, BG and AG, passing them over, and then this time they multiply by their secret to get the same shared key overall. The most common curves that we have are the SEPT 256R1, which is P256, the Bitcoin curve SEPT 256K1, and curve 25519. But in most communications, this is the curve that's used in elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman. The other method that we can use when we're exchanging the keys is to use a public key method to exchange. And this is basically just using encryption. Basically, Bob has a key that he wants Alice to use. So we'll encrypt the key with RSA, say, and that will be encrypted, send over to Alice, and Alice will use her private key to be able to decrypt the encapsulated key and then recover the same key. Two things we need to think about is forward secrecy, to make sure that any hack of any key that we have will not reveal the previous keys. And ephemeral means that we need to make sure that we don't use these default parameters for the key generation process. So let's now look at signature methods. So with signature methods, we will now make sure that Bob can prove himself, his identity to Alice, and also to make sure that there is integrity in the data that's received. The main digital signatures that we create are these ones with these curves here, which gives these signatures. ECDSA is one of the most popular methods, but we also get ED 25519 overall. Okay, so the signatures are created with either RSA, elliptic curve methods, or ELGAMO. But these are the two main methods that we have. For here, it's RSA methods, and typically what's called RSA PSS. And over here we have ECDSA or EDDSA are the two main elliptic curve methods. Okay, so here are some of the methods that we use here for our signatures: RSA, ECDSA, and EDDSA. So with a signature, what happens is that we take a hash, and then we sign that hash with the private key. We then send that signature over, and then we can use the public key to be able to verify that signature. With RSA, what we do is we take the D and the N value, and it's just the same as the encryption process, but we're using the different parameters this time, D and N. And then to verify it, we use the E and the N value. So it's the other way around from encryption. Okay, so two popular RSA signature methods are PSS and PKCS1 version 1.5. For ECDSA, we have a random nonce value. We take a hash of the message, and then we use the private key to create a signature, typically R and S, and then we use the public key to be able to verify that. What we need to watch is that we don't leak that nonce value, that K value, otherwise someone can actually hack the private key from that. Another method that's now popular is called EDDSA, and it's the same type of process, but it's a bit more lightweight overall and has smaller keys. Okay, so if we have a look at the cloud signatures, this is in the Amazon KMS. We can see for signing and verifying, these are the methods that we can actually use. There's the RSA methods, and there's the elliptic curve methods that we can actually have. Okay, so as a final topic, let's look at digital certificates and see how Bob can prove his identity to Alice. So for this, we have, we see it on websites that they're safe because the certificate has been checked. So in this case, here's the certificate. This is the who it's been issued to. This is the issuer of the certificate, and this is the root authority, the root CA or the root certificate authority. Basically, this authority trusts this authority to assign certificates, and this authority has issued a certificate to this entity. So overall, we have the validity, how long it's valid for. We have the names of the entity, and then we have the public key. The main thing that's stored in here is the public key of the entity, because we will sign with the private key and then prove the signature with the public key. So in this case, we have an RSA 2048-bit public key with an E value of 65,537, which is fairly standard. And this is the modulus value here, the N value, and there's the E value there. Okay, so that's the core of what a certificate, what a public certificate looks like. So this is a certificate. When we render it, we can see here when it's valid, who it was issued to, and who it was issued by. Then we can look at the details of it with this tab here. We can see here it's an RSA key 2048, and then we can actually have a look at the issuer of the certificate, and then finally we can have a look at the signature actually on the certificate. Basically, that's created. A hash is created of the certificate, and then it is signed by Trent, as we'll see. Okay, we get two types of certificate. One has a key pair on it. You can see here we have the private key on there, and the other one is a public certificate that just has the public key on it. So basically, we can have this key pair, and then we will export this as an exportable certificate with just a public key. There is various formats that we have with this, such as text formats using P7B format, or we can have binary files, PFX, P12, and these allow us to be able to apply a password. Okay, so if we just go through the basic process of encrypting, Alice will send over her public key. We'll encrypt the plain text with her public key to create the ciphertext. She will then use her private key to decrypt that. If we want Bob to sign, he will sign a hash of the message with his private key. He'll then send over his public key, and then Alice can actually check the signature to see that it was Bob who signed the message. Okay, so this is what the certificate actually looks like. And when we want to create a certificate, we need to get it signed by a certificate authority. So we generate a key pair, then we export our public key, send that to the certificate authority. The certificate authority also has a key pair and signs this with its private key, and then sends us back a certificate that's been issued by the CA. One of the most popular certificate authorities is Let's Encrypt, and they were an intermediary signer and not a root signer, but now they are actually trusted to be a root signer. So these are the root CAs, these are what are called intermediary CAs, and these are the ones which actually create the certificates for the entities. So the various formats that we get for our certificates, the PEM format, PKCS7, and these are in a text type format with base64, or we can get binary formats such as DER and CER. Okay, so the way it works is that we have our root CAs, and they are highly trusted. Then we have intermediary CAs, which are verified by the root CAs. When Bob has a public key, he sends it to the intermediary, and then they will create a certificate by signing the certificate with her private key. Bob will then send that certificate over. It will contain his public key, and Alice will be able to check the public key from that. The root CA and the intermediary CA's public keys will be held on Alice's computer as a long-term store, so that she can check the signatures on the certificate. Okay, so there's a trusted root one in here. Here are intermediaries, which have got various signing rights. And then finally, we can have what's called a self-signed certificate, and that can never be trusted because it's only the entity themselves which is signing for themselves. Okay, so let's take that process through. So Bob wants to send data to Alice, so he'll get her public key, and he'll get that through Alice's digital certificate. He'll then take the message, take a hash of it, and then sign that with his private key. He'll then encrypt the whole of that with Alice's public key, send that over, and then Alice will use her private key to be able to decrypt that and read the message. Then she needs to check the signature, so she'll get Bob's public key from the digital certificate that's been signed by Trent, and then be able to check the signature to show that it was signed by Bob. So let's take that through step by step. Take the message, encrypt a hash of the message, then we'll take Alice's public key to create the encrypted message. We'll then decrypt that with her private key, so she can read the message and she'll have this signature. Then she'll be able to check that against Bob's public key, that he was the one who sent the message. So as an overview, these are the main signature methods that Bob would be using to sign for data, this with his private key, and then validating Alice verify with his public key. Okay, so there's the public key going to Trent. Trent will then sign a certificate, it's called 509 certificate, with his private key, and then Alice will receive that certificate and then check it against Trent's public key. From there, she'll be able to take Bob's public key from that and check the signature that he has sent. ECDSA, as we've seen before, is a popular method for doing that. That's the basic mechanism there. And this is the mechanism for RSA signatures that we've actually saw. EDSA is now becoming popular, and it's a more lightweight and scalable method. Okay, so those are the four main signature methods that we typically use. We'll just have a look at one of them. This is for ECDSA. We can generate our key from there, but if we see our key, this is the key that we're creating from there, and this is the different hashing methods and the different curve types that we can actually use. Okay, so that's been an overview of applied cryptography. Thank you.